we're here with Sara Acosta, who's an environmental journalist and translator. She's the co-founder and editor of Spanish magazine Ballena Blanca, which focuses on environment and the economy. She has been a correspondent in the US, France, and Brussels for different Spanish publications. Sara, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to be having a look at the US election from a climate point of view. These are very, very important elections for many different reasons. They have been described as such by different media, but they are also very, very important from the environmental point of view. So we're going to try to look at these elections, and we're going to try to give reporters from all over the world some pointers as to where to look when covering these elections and keeping an environmental and climate angle. So as a non-American environmental reporter, what are you most interested in when you're looking at this election? What do you think is the key elements?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you first, Santiago, and thank you, Climate Tracker, for inviting me to join these conversations. First thing, I would say shocked, but I'm not really shocked. It's like that climate change is like the no issue, right? I mean, it's like I was reading that I think if you take into account all the presidential debates from 1980, okay, in the United States, I think climate change, the whole time of debating about that, it's been like 10 minutes, right? So first, I mean, climate change in general, even from an European point of view, it's not something we are debating about in general, okay? But what is very, from this point of view, from Spain, from Europe, what is very important, I think, is that these extremes, right? So it's like totally an ideological issue. If you're a Democrat, you are, of course, fighting against the climate change. If you're Republican, you're not. And it's not even a scientific issue, right? And that's very, very important in general. But the thing I am most interested about now is the withdrawal of the Paris Agreement in next November. So I think it's a very historical moment from that point of view, because maybe for those who don't know, so United States started the process to withdraw from the Paris Agreement the 4th November last year, so 2019. The process will be complete on 4th November this year. So that would be one day after, right, the elections. So, and it's very, very important, because it would mean that if Donald Trump wins, United States would be out of the multilateral process automatically. Okay, if Biden wins, and this would be that the United States rejoins the global club, let's say, and I think the process from that moment would take like 30 days, I think, but it would be relatively short. Mm-hmm. The consequences, if it's Trump, right? It would be that you have like the most powerful country out of a multilateral process. Paris Agreement is the really only international agreement regarding climate change ever. not even Kyoto. So, right? So I think this is the issue of these elections.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Scientists have called this election. Some scientists have called this election the most important election in a million years. This remarking that if Trump wins, there will be some irreversible losses in the environmental field worldwide. Do you agree with this, or do you think it's exaggerated?
Well, I think you are referring to Michael Mann.
Yeah, I think Michael Mann did, and
Yeah.
I've read it some from somewhere else as well.
Yes. I would not be able to put such a huge, um, such a huge calculation or conclusion, but I think it's very, climate change has always huge words, you know, prophetic words. And, but if from a journalistic point of view, it's not exaggerated to say that it's maybe the most important one, because, okay, very few years ago, Paris Agreement did not exist. It meant that maybe, this multilateral process was not even able to work, because it's been demonstrated that binding agreements did not work, right? It was for the first time a non-binding agreement which made the success. And also thinking about the United States, and to avoid a Senate votation, as Obama did, right?
Mhm.
So it's very important to go on with the process, and the non-binding process is very important. So, from the point of view of a global scale, of a global agreement, which did not exist a little, like a few years ago, it's completely other thing, and I would say it's like a turning point, it's a turning point. Yeah,
Mhm.
from a journalistic point of view, I would say that yeah, I do not dare to to give bigger numbers.
You have mentioned a couple of times multilateralism and the multilateral process and the Paris Agreement, and you said before that if Trump wins, well, the U.S. will be out of the global club, of, just to so call it. What would that actually mean for climate action worldwide? Would it be such an obstacle?
Well, first it's like the political message, right? But now, okay, now, for example, you have European Union, you have China. Okay, so let's understand that now, from the Paris Agreement moment, it's the time for higher ambitions for countries, right? To establish higher ambitions, okay, to tackle climate change. And okay, so even China has already said, okay, I'm in, right?
Mhm.
So from a point of view of fighting against it, you have like a huge country, like more than 400 million people not in it, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, it's not that we can say now that United States is the biggest polluter in the world, okay? But it's one of the biggest polluter, right? So automatically you would have a huge country with more than 400 million people out of a process considered very, very important, even for a country like China,
Mhm. So
right?
this would mean, um, just to make sure I understand, this would, let's say, give an excuse or a reason for other countries to also not be ambitious because they are saying, okay, if the US is not doing it, why should I?
Well, yes, there is a risk, okay? There is a risk, but and even if you, for example, you have all the if you do not have the federal level in the United
Mhm.
States, okay, let's say that cities and states on their own represents, like, I think 70% of GDP, right? So for the globe, for a part, it would be possible to go forward in the process, because cities, states, California, New York, would do things. But even, experts, for example, when you talk to World Resources Institutes, they say it's not enough. So you would lose a lot of impulse to have a really ambition, a really global ambition for it, right?
During COP25, just keeping on the topic of multilateralism, we saw, and I was sitting on the next table next to you, covering the event, and we saw a very clear block of countries difficult in the negotiations, or making them like somehow blocking them in a way. You had the US, you had Brazil, Australia, and a few more, Saudi Arabia, in some cases Russia. These are all countries that have, in some way or the other, the leaders have often doubted the accuracy of climate science or climate science itself. Would this club of deniers be reinforced if Trump wins, or on the other way, weakened if Biden wins?
Wow. Yeah. On the short term, I would say maybe yes. Okay, but this is a very long process. I think, this is a very long process. So when you do have other countries as big as China or the European Union itself saying, okay, I mean, there is no doubt we have to take measures about this, I think in the medium or long term, this would not be as powerful. This is my impression, but I don't know.
Just thinking, as putting myself on the shoes of a Brazilian journalist or Australian journalist who may watch this video and thinking, well, how will this affect or will it affect at all the climate diplomacy and their own climate goals in their countries? Can it, or is completely independent, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it's completely independent, right? But if, for example, if I look from a European point of view, I mean, I don't know if I'm able to think from an Australian point of view, right? Yeah. But if I do think about the countries near Spain, for example, because okay, if we take this as a global thing, but afterwards there are country blocks, right? So for example, from Spanish point of view, right? Having a new ecological transition ministry, for example, it's important for other countries in Europe. Or having the first one, which was the French one, it's been important to import the idea here, right? So regional diplomacy, it's very important, right? So and also from an Australian point of view, United States is very important, right?
Of course.
So
before, you were mentioning that climate change and climate has been a non-issue in the presidential elections, and actually given a very interesting figure. There's this 10 minutes aggregated time in all presidential debates since 1988, I think I understood, but or since the 1980s. And in this election, my feeling is that also it's getting kind of sidetracked, or climate has been forgotten, both by the candidates and often by the media as well. Who is still talking about climate in the US? If I'm a climate reporter and I want to follow the climate debate, who should I look for?
Okay, you mean from a media point of view? Yeah.
Either way, either media
either
or
way.
Politicians,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, politicians, I don't know if I would find any, but I mean, as officially, you know. Um, from a who's still talking about this, even with coronavirus, because now is the time of both issues, so it's even more difficult, right?
Yeah.
I think, okay, from a journalistic point of view, it's impressive how the Guardian still, looks at it all the time,
Mhm.
all the time. And I mean, because they are not, I think it's interesting because they are not Americans. So that's why okay,
Yeah.
so from outside. Of course, I think I mean, if you look inside, right? I mean, New York Times, I mean, from the mainstream media, it's not only that they look at it all the time, it's that they analyze and they go deep into it, right? Because
Mhm.
one of the interesting points in US elections is that no one talks about it. No one talks about it, but if they do, it's not even from a scientific way or
Mhm.
an analyze, you know, way or a deep way. For example, no one's talking about transport. What does it mean for transport? What does it mean for health? What does it mean for pollution? So no, it's not even that we mention climate change. Okay, but once you have
Mhm.
done it, is it deep? Is it superficial? you know so in New York Times, for example, I think it is a good way to understand it, because it's so complex, that it's not only talking about it, it's explaining it
Mhm.
in order to people to understand it. If I And it's interesting because now it's coronavirus, so you do have, mainstream media that do have to talk about coronavirus. They don't have the option. So they are few still talking about climate change. I think these two are representative of it. But I think it's time for specialized media,
Mhm.
because coronavirus or not, they are forced to talk about it,
Mhm.
right? Because it's their issue. So
Mhm.
when you do have climate or environmental specialized media, now is the moment.
Mhm.
I would mention, I like, in the United States, Inside Climate News. I think they
Mhm.
do a great job, and I was looking at it a little bit before, and of course they do have their menu, 2020 elections,
Yeah.
right? And they are going to talk about it all the time. So I think it's a good point of reference to look at.
Mhm. Let's we've talked a bit about the general picture. We've talked a little bit about Donald Trump, but I would like to talk a little bit about Biden as well,
Yeah.
because Biden here looks a lot like the climate candidate. But is he really? I mean, he hasn't really promised to stop or to ban fracking or to phase it out either. He has not. He is still accepting, his candidacy is still accepting oil and gas industry donations. He has distanced himself from the Green New Deal publicly. Um, so I mean, yeah, he is a climate candidate because by opposition to Trump, anyone would be. Do you agree with that, or do you have a lot of hope that Biden, if he wins, can can change things substantially?
Well, mm, I am convinced, not Biden, I mean the Democrats, if they do win, first, I think US would rejoin Paris Agreement.
Mm.
So that's a huge fact. Well, it's not still a fact. We will see, but it's I think it's a huge probability, right?
Mhm.
So that would be a first step, very, very climate, let's say, okay?
Mhm.
But if I think of Biden, of any other Democrat candidate, okay, I think in the United States, it does not depend only on the candidate, on the person, on the interest, on the will of that person, right? But on the system.
Mhm.
So, because you have the Senate and the Congress, and there is a vote, and that's blocking all the time, you know. So, well, let's see how Congress will be organized after the elections. But so I think what is very important is changing mentalities, and changing the United States is very difficult, you know. That's why I think for the Paris Agreement, it was very clever of Obama to avoid the Senate. So let's make a non-binding issue, thinking of this Republican opposition and trying to avoid that way in order to join the whole world, you know. So I think they will look for ways like that, you know. And from that place, you can establish, you know, I don't know, or re-establish, you know, the Clean Air Act that Trump has completely, you know, let down, or other issues. Because when you see how people there move, for example, simple things as taking a combustion car for every single thing.
Yep.
You know, if I look at that from a European point of view, I think it's not only politics. Of course, it's politics, but the way of life is very anticlimactic, you know.
Yes, yes, indeed. And actually, there is a Senate election as well, on November 3rd, same day as the presidential election. So we could, and actually, the polls. I was looking at them right now as we were talking, and there is a slight advantage for the Democrats. The Democrats, if the polls are right as well, we've learned in the last few years not to trust the polls more than we should. But they have
That's right.
yeah, there is a slight chance that the Democrats may win the Senate. Would stay 55 seats for the Democrats, 53 for the Republicans. So I think that's a very good point. It's not only the presidential election that matters. We should also keep an eye on the Senate election, because the Republicans may lose that majority as well, and that is a very important point for the climate as well. Okay,
Totally.
so one last question, Sara. Do you have any resources that you would like to share with reporters worldwide, people from Africa, Asia, South America, Europe, and obviously Australia? Do you have any resources you would recommend for reporters who are looking at the U.S. election, either at work or just because they have an interest in this, or for context, that they can journalistic resources that you have in mind?
You mentioned context, and I think that's very important, you know, to get close to the issue in the United States and regarding the elections. And first, it's a non-journalistic source, but I think they are very, very good, and it's World Resources Institute, you know, even because they have a journalistic angle in their communications, in their informations, and the scientific papers or whatever. So they put very good in context, you know, and they update a lot. So to get a first approach and to get deep into it, and I think it's a good place to look at. Well, press agencies, of course. I would say press agencies on Twitter, because maybe a lot of journalists do not have access to the press agency services, right? So Twitter, it's a very good tool. And I would say, of course, mainstream media. US mainstream media, New York Times, Washington Post, and from a non-US point of view, I would still say The Guardian, you know. And I will repeat this Inside Climate News. I think all that it's it's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Sara. That was my last question. I don't know if you would like to add anything else, if you have anything else in mind.
Well, thank you first. I would say that climate change is so complex, so technical, so sorry. From time to time, you know, you don't get it. So I would emphasize the importance of translating to simple words, simple concepts. You know, like changing journalistic rules, even. You know, to get to people, because I think it's a especially difficult issue. So translating is very important.
I have to say for anyone watching this that Sara's publication in Spain does a fantastic job exactly at that, at translating very complex topics into very understandable stories. She takes two of the most arcane and technical and difficult topics as environment and economics, and actually does a great job at putting them together in a blender and getting something that actually I can understand, which is really pretty good.
Well, we do our best. So
Thank,
thank you, Santiago and Climate Tracker.
thank you very much, Sara, and hope to have you another time soon around here.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.